I've been a criminal defense attorney in San Diego since 2007. I can tell you that defending against violent crimes is one of the more difficult things that we could do. And I say that because you're dealing with usually an alleged victim, or let's be real, in many cases, a victim of a really bad act that's affected them mentally, that's affected them emotionally, and it's probably affected them physically as well. And defending against these cases comes with a lot of emotion on both sides, both obviously from the client, the criminally accused, as well as the alleged victim and their families, whether they are living or not. In this video, we are going to discuss the many different types of violent crimes, particularly the violent crimes that we see a lot of in San Diego. We're going to talk about things like murder and homicide. We're going to talk about sex crimes and what that looks like from an in-court perspective, from a public perception perspective, and from consequences that last on those types of offenses far beyond what may happen in the courtroom through the trial process. And then we're also going to talk about more common offenses like robbery and stuff along those lines, torture, aggravated kidnapping, stuff like that we see far too often, quite frankly, as a society, but things that we need to deal with. And we're also going to talk about some defenses, some successful defenses, talk about some specific cases that we've had some success with employing such defenses on violent crime offenses here in San Diego, and stressing the significance of making sure you surround yourself with the right team of defense attorneys and law firm when you are facing violent criminal charges. First thing people think about when you say violent crime is homicide, right? Homicide could come in many different forms. Homicide could be murder, right? Generally speaking, homicide is the unlawful killing of a human being. When homicide is charged as murder, that usually implies that there was malice involved, meaning someone else lost their life and that there was malice on your part if you are the accused. Murder in California could be first degree or second degree. First degree from a penalty perspective is at least 25 to life if convicted. Second degree is 15 to life, assuming there's no weapons, no special circumstances, those types of things. And the difference between first and second degree is the term premeditation, meaning there was some thought. It wasn't like a heat of passion type thing or, a felony DUI that turned into a murder. So generally, when we talk about premeditation in California, that could be seconds. It doesn't need to be this elaborate planning, months, hiring a hitman, all the things you see on TV when you start talking about premeditation. And levels underneath murder are different variations of manslaughter. There you're dealing with usually like if it's a fight or if you think you have a right to defend yourself, maybe it could be imperfect self-defense. Not enough to get you convicted of murder, but certainly you went above and beyond what the law permits as it relates to what is permitted for self-defense or defense of another. Sometimes it's just gross negligence. It could be gross negligence being behind the wheel of a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol. It could be something that you did that was so outrageous that you could be charged not with murder, but charged with a different form of manslaughter. And at the lowest level, there's misdemeanor manslaughter, which is a lot of times you'll see if there's a traffic collision and a vehicle code violation was violated and someone lost their life, not rising to the level of a DUI or anything along those lines. There are many defenses to different levels of homicide, quite frankly, depending on what the actual charge is. Starting at the top, murder. Well, maybe it wasn't you. Maybe you have an alibi defense. Maybe it was you and you actually have a lawful defense. Maybe you had a right to defend yourself. Maybe you had a right to defend someone else. Specifically in 2019, this firm handled a pretty well publicized self-defense homicide case. Our client was involved in a romantic relationship with someone who was still technically legally married. That individual's spouse came home, found our client literally in bed with his then wife, and reacted in a way that many people would, with violence, with aggression. But our client had a right to defend himself, because when our client was getting struck in the head with a pipe over and over again, despite not initiating any violence, he was taking it, he made the decision that if he didn't do something to defend himself, he would have wound up dead. He had a knife on him, and he stabbed the person who was hitting him. That person ultimately and tragically lost his life. It was never a dispute as to who was responsible for the death. It was not a who did it. It was not a when was it done. Everyone knew the issue was it going to be a viable self-defense? A jury of 12 people believed that it was and voted not guilty. So self-defense is a very viable and realistic defense to violent crimes, particularly murder. Without question, the most polarizing type of violent offenses are those involving sex crimes. There is a visceral reaction when sex crime charges are read to a jury, or quite frankly, even when they're read by a judge or presented by a district attorney. The effect on that courtroom is something that people do not forget. It is something that in many instances could shake them to their core just based on the allegations. And a lot of times, many people, unfortunately, many jurors really struggle with proof beyond a reasonable doubt and holding the prosecution to that standard when a violent offense is alleged and when that involves a sex crime. We're talking about things like rape. We're talking about things like child molest. We are talking about the whole gambit of things that create that reaction that the public is fearful of. And it is essential to make sure that if you're charged with a violent offense, particularly a violent sex offense, that you have an attorney and a law firm by your side that understands the magnitude of these types of cases, that understand the many different ways just a couple of years in prison can turn into life with the wrong fact alleged or the right fact proven, depending on what side of the aisle you are looking at this case. But just like with other violent offenses, there are viable, strong defenses to sex crimes. If you're charged with rape, even if there's DNA, even if it's undisputed that there was some type of physical or sexual relationship, that doesn't mean that you committed an offense just because someone alleged that you have. There may be certain situations where they would have to even prove the prosecution that there was in fact a sexual act, let alone the fact that it was not consensual and that you don't have a viable defense to it. So the key with any violent offense, especially with the sex offense, less is more as it comes to talking or cooperating with law enforcement, because they will spin anything you say, anything you do, especially when you're dealing with an accuser who's accusing you of committing one of the worst offenses imaginable, a sex offense against them. Now, so far in this video, we have talked about how, sex crimes, when we're talking about violent crimes, are pretty much the most emotional moments in a criminal case. And the penalties that come with these types of convictions match that type of emotion. Quite frankly, the public's hatred towards these type of offenses, and unfortunately, a lot of times these types of offenders, without understanding anything about them, or certainly the weight of the evidence that may be against them. So if you're charged, and if you're convicted, more importantly, with a sex offense like rape, you could be subject to at least 8 years in prison. There are so many ways, far too many to count, unfortunately, in California, where you could wind up spending the rest of your life in prison if certain factors are alleged and proven. Child molest, having inappropriate physical contact for a sexual purpose with a minor under the age of 14, 288A of the Penal Code, one of the more common charges. You could get up to 8 years in state prison on one of those counts alone. God forbid there's multiple accusers. There's a multiple victim enhancement. You could face 15 to life for each accuser, even if there were only 2 acts. So let's imagine a situation where you're accused of a violent crime, a sex crime, of 2 minors under the age of 14. It could have been touching over the clothes. Listen, still very, very serious. Still very, very wrong. And it could be 2 separate victims on only 2 occasions, and you could be facing 30 years to life in state prison. It is essential to understand how California is so strict when you're dealing with violent crimes, especially as it relates to violent sex crimes. Now that we've covered murder, we've covered homicides, we've covered sex crimes, let's talk about sort of the catch-all of all the other violent crimes that we will see and what people are charged with, particularly in California, essentially as it relates to cases in San Diego. Another type of violent crime would be robbery. It's where you take the personal property of another by force or fear. Robbery could be armed robbery like you see in the movies, masks, guns, all that stuff. It could be physically beating up someone and taking their chain. It could be something as simple as you go to the grocery store, you grab a soda, you don't pay for it, the security guard tries to stop you, and through force or fear, you use that to get away with the theft. That's known as an Estes robbery, We see other charges like mayhem, like torture, far more serious accusations, or usually over a period of time, disfigurement of a body, those types of things. The worst of the worst, where you could be facing up to the rest of your life in state prison. Other offenses that we see that fall under this umbrella of violent crimes are domestic violence offenses. Domestic violence can be as simple as spousal battery. It could be the most serious domestic violence forms under Penal Code Section 273.5 that can be charged as a felony. If there's great bodily injury enhancements, you could get 3 years, you could get 5 years, so on and so forth, tacked on to your sentence. There are so many other violent offenses in California. What's important to know as well is that if you're convicted of a violent felony in California, that is a violent strike. It is the most serious type of felony offense. Where you serve your sentence will be affected by it. At what percentage you serve your sentence, meaning that you will have to serve at least 2/3, if not higher, of that sentence if you're convicted of a violent offense in California versus being convicted of a non-violent offense, even if it's a strike, even if it's a felony. So it is essential to understand all of these things, whether you're charged with murder, whether you're charged with the sex crime, or whether you're charged with stuff like robbery or mayhem or torture or the simple most form of domestic violence. So in this video, we have talked about the laundry list of violent offenses in California, and particularly the ones that we have seen so frequently here in San Diego. We talked about homicide. We defined it. We talked about murder, manslaughter, and what each case entails and what the prosecution must prove and potential punishments for those who are convicted of such homicide offenses. We then broke down the most emotional and the most really high-strung types of violent crime offenses that anyone can imagine, the violent crimes involving sexual assaults. We've talked about the penalties involved, including but not limited to sex offender registration and extensive time in state prison, all the way up to life imprisonment sentences. And then we finished the video by talking about the different types of other violent offenses that we see. Things like robbery, things like mayhem, things like torture, things like domestic violence. We also explored some defenses to the most serious violent offenses like murder. We even went over a case that the firm handled in 2019, which was the epitome of how a viable self-defense claim could beat a case where our client was charged with murder and he was able to walk out the door literally that night and be home with his family, all because he had a good defense and he had the right defense team by his side to defend that type of case in that moment. If you or a loved one find yourself charged with the violent offense, no matter how serious you may think it may be, no matter how serious it may be in actuality, you do not want to wait and see. You do not want to sleep on it. You want to be proactive, not reactive. And that starts with the attorney and the law firm that are there with and for you from day one to protect your interests, to make sure you get as good, if not a better outcome than anyone possible charged with a similar violent offense. If you like this video, if you find it helpful, if you have any questions, we ask that you comment on it, we ask that you like it, we ask that you share it with anyone who may be going through a situation that may need to understand that not all hope should be lost if charged with a violent offense. There are defenses out there, there are law firms out there who know how to handle these cases at the highest of levels.